Syrians are demanding truth and justice, and the new leadership is promising punishment for crimes committed during more than half a century of Assad rule. But is it equipped to carry out this mammoth exercise? And will the process be transparent and fair? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. The head of Syria's new administration has promised to hunt down everyone who took part in the torture or killing of detainees during the Assad regime. Ahmed al-Shara is even offering rewards for information leading to their arrest. Roughly 150,000 people were arrested and forcibly disappeared since the crackdown on pro-democracy rallies in 2011 that sparked the civil war. Many are believed to have been killed. Those who survived bear physical or psychological scars. Now, families of the victims are demanding justice and accountability. There is no shortage of evidence. But can Syria's new leadership establish a sound legal system to ensure fair trials? And what can the international community and the United Nations do to help? We'll examine these questions with our guests, but first this report by Sarah Gill, and a warning to our viewers that some of the images in her report are disturbing.
Torture, execution, attacking civilians with chemical weapons, using starvation as a weapon of war, and the bombing of homes, hospitals and historical buildings. These are just a few of the atrocities Syria's former government is accused of committing. And while the ousting of Bashar al-Assad is a moment of celebration, for those who suffered under his rule, the feelings are bittersweet.
Our joy is mixed with sadness. The regime arrested me first and then my 3 sons. I'm free now, but they are still missing. I don't know where they are, if they're alive.
The new administration has pledged to unify the divided country, promising justice and accountability.
The liberation of Syria does not mean only the vanishing of the tyrant and his group, but also the establishment of a state of justice, dignity, freedom and pride, and the protection of rights.
Activists and monitoring groups say there is plenty of evidence of the crimes committed over more than 5 decades. First by the father Hafez al-Assad, and then by his son. The United Nations believes more violations will come to light.
Despite extensive documentation and testimonies, they only scratch the surface of the carceral system's horrors. These images are a profound testament to unspeakable suffering and pain beyond comprehension endured by those detained, their families, and their loved ones.
Assad has fled to Russia. Some say he escaped unpunished. But activists who have worked for years to document what they say amounts to his government's war crimes are adamant that justice will be served. Sarah Gill, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
And let's bring in our guests. From London, we're joined by Ibrahim Olabi, a barrister and board member of the Syrian British Consortium. He's researched and advised extensively on international legal cases related to the conflict in Syria. In Washington, D.C. is Roger Lou Phillips, legal director of the Syria Justice and Accountability Centre, which documents violations of human rights and international law in Syria. And also in London is Kholoud Helmi, a Syrian journalist and human rights activist. She is a member of the Families for Freedom, a movement of women whose relatives were detained and disappeared during the Assad regime. Welcome to you all. Ibrahim, I'd like to start with you. People in Syria want justice, understandably, and they want it quickly. How can you move quickly enough to stop that from becoming potentially violent retribution?
Well, the first thing is to be able to capitalize on the enormous evidence that has already been documented. I mean, as you said in your introduction, the kind of good part of what's been happening for the last 14 years is that Syrian civil society, international organizations, states who have been keen to hold the regime to account have been documenting extensively what's been going on. So we're not starting from scratch. That's the first thing. The second thing is to be able to sit amongst the authorities in Damascus and to sit amongst ourselves as Syrian actors and be able to put some strategies together. All of us are kind of still in a state of happy shock for what has happened in Syria over the last 10 days. And so now is the time to really get together and start strategizing, what to do next. For the last 10, 14 years, we've been looking for cracks, a domestic case here, focusing on chemical weapons only there just because, there might be some more teeth to that thematic crime, focusing on torture only at the International Court of Justice because that's the only convention we could, hold Syria to account to. But all of a sudden, a lot more opportunities present themselves. The evidence is there. The international organizations that were created specifically for Syria to document evidence and prepare evidence for the eventuality of a day like this are all in place. And so a lot of the investments and a lot of the trauma and the pain and the suffering that the families of the loved ones who have given evidence over the last years is now in good shape to be able to move that process ahead. It will not be I don't think in a context like Syria we have something kind of an optimum justice. I don't think looking at the faces of gassed children or those who've lost loved ones in prison, anything could be justice. But what we will do is make sure the perpetrators held accountable, make sure to have a narrative of what has happened so that no one in a couple of years' time will say, oh no, Assad was great, look what happened to the country now. Sure. And some of the rhetoric
Yes.
that we're already hearing from some politicians, unfortunately.
Roger, time is of the essence then, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we have an enormous opportunity now to build upon the collections of evidence that have been received by civil society organizations and to build upon that. There has been this veil of secrecy that the Syrian government has operated within. There have been peeks behind that curtain during the last 12 years. We've obtained a large number of Syrian government documents, but a huge amount more are now available. And we're in the process of collecting as much as possible to allow these transitional justice frameworks and mechanisms to work. It will be, essential for first the new Syrian government to form itself, to have a constitutional framework, and then to establish a criminal code so that we can have a process of fair trials that proceed. I think that if the Syrian community is engaged and they're seen, they can see that a collection process is going on, the preservation, the establishment of legal frameworks, that they will see the wheels of justice are now turning.
Kholoud, Roger's just touched on the processes, the challenges that lie ahead in getting any trials underway, but how people need to see justice being done, don't they? How do you persuade them to let the authorities do that and let a proper process unfold?
I think the people now, they are just looking forward to what is going to happen. But we have to bear in mind that families of the disappeared people are really hurt at these days. They're lost. They don't know what to do. Most of the mothers and the families who were waiting for their loved ones, they restored hope when the prisons opened, and everybody assumed, including myself, that I'm going to see my brother when they open the prisons. Unfortunately, we haven't seen anyone. I'm so happy for the limited numbers of people released from prison. But until now, we families are lost. We don't know if the documentations are going to be kept or are we going to lose the documentation. If they are killed by the regime, when and how, and all the things that we see online, because we've been bombarded as families of the disappeared people by misinformation, disinformation, around the past 1-2 weeks. So families are now in pain. And I'm not going to say that they are as angry as they could take revenge on their own now. This is never going to happen because they are just either collapsing, fainting, and taking a moment now.
All right. Ibrahim, Amnesty, many other NGOs have said similar things, but Amnesty says this is an historic opportunity to address a horrifying catalogue of human rights violations, including attacks with chemical weapons, barrel bombs and other war crimes, as well as murder, torture, enforced disappearance and extermination that amounts to crimes against humanity. Where on earth do you begin?
I think this was part of the regime strategy since day one, to overload and overburden the system. I think, the Syrian regime has picked out every single crime. It's as if almost they've looked at, the International Criminal Court's, list of crimes and decided to pick each and every one of them. It's very hard to find a crime in terms of the scale or in terms of the diversity or in terms of the range that the Syrian regime has not committed. But luckily, we did not accept that, the regime will just overwhelm the system to kind of push us to inaction, to make us unable to move. We have been moving throughout the last 14 years, and we will continue to move. Obviously, the range of crimes and the magnitude of crimes make it hard to kind of prioritize, make it hard to know where to focus, and this process will take time, and it will take a lot of consultations, and it will take a lot of engagement. But I think what we have kind of a united voice on is that we will not kind of forget, and we will keep pushing. We have been pushing for justice and accountability against much more difficult odds, against a regime that's being normalized regionally and internationally, against a regime that had a seat at the United Nations and was blocking every effort. And against all these odds, Syrian actors, Syrian survivors and victims and associations and NGOs and our allies within the international communities, which were not many at towards the end of the time, kind of kept pushing and kept the issue on the table. So we will definitely not be overwhelmed by the range of crime. It's just a matter of time before we try and process what has happened, and we are on a solid base to start that.
Roger, even before the events of the last week, I know your organisation, the Syria Justice and Accountability Centre, you've been collecting, over 2 million pieces of documentation of the conflict, conducting research already, but it does seem almost overwhelming in terms of the volume of crimes that need investigating. How do you start?
Indeed, there is a huge amount of criminality that took place over the last 12 years and even longer. I think we need to look at all of the above solutions and follow a clue that was provided by the Ukraine example. The ICC should be pursued as an opportunity. Universal jurisdiction prosecutions can continue to move forward as they have to date. There will be a number of former regime officials that end up in Europe and could be subject to prosecution in the very near term, while Syria is undertaking its process of creating legal frameworks to allow the creation of a new mechanism that could have some international assistance and identify appropriate personnel, judges and lawyers, in order to staff that institution and proceed with the vast majority of cases.
All right, we'll come back to the mechanisms shortly about how justice might be delivered. But Kholoud, I mean, you've witnessed in your hometown of Daraya the shootings and the detentions of people at the start of the civil war. And your own brother, Ahmed Helmi, was detained in 2012 and detained for 3 years. What lessons have you learned from your own personal circumstances and what you've experienced as to how you believe people will get justice and should get justice?
First of all, it took us a long time to learn the lesson, and we learned it hard. If I may say that 2 months ago, I was in despair. I lost faith and hope in everything. But here we are. Assad is gone now, and we restored hope. So we believe that the way to justice is going to be achieved one day, and it's going to be near, because it took us 13 years to topple the regime. And now I think we need another 14 years to set them accountable. But we persist on setting them accountable. We will never lose faith. Even if somebody come to me now and he says, like, your brother was killed under torture or anywhere in his cell, I need the body, and I need to bury all the people who were martyred by the regime in prisons. And we need the bodies of the missing persons, the ones that we don't know if they are alive or dead or taken by the regime forces or any other forces. I know that we know that we do have legal support from our colleagues and from the organizations working on accountability in Syria. But we, the families, will never settle until we achieve justice for our loved ones.
Ibrahim, we're not just talking about Bashar al-Assad, are we? We're talking about his father. We're talking about the 40,000 people killed in Hama in 1982. There is a lot of justice and investigation that needs to be done, isn't there?
Well, and yes, I mean, absolutely. This has been an era, a regime of 54 years, and starting from his father that died, but also the uncle, who is alive. We don't know exactly where he is now. He was in Switzerland. There was an arrest warrant against him for Switzerland for the crimes he committed in Hama, and then he sought refuge in Assad's Syria. We will be looking definitely for a lot of these individuals, and yes, it's a whole apparatus of people, and it's an apparatus that is also very bureaucratic in the way it commits torture and commits these crimes. I mean, looking at the pictures and the images that are coming out, these were orders given. They're keeping the names. They're keeping exactly what happened to these to these individuals. It's an industry. It's an industry, but by all means, and there are people who are responsible for this industry. And obviously the search will continue, and a lot of them are alive. I mean, in a way, I personally am happy that they are alive, in order to be able to watch and see, first of all, the celebrations that are taking place in Damascus and other places with the fall of their regime, and how people are living under freedom in that sense. And also that they're seeing that there are a lot of us who will not rest a day until they're held to account. In a way, they know that political bargains happen, and if enough pressure is applied on those harboring them, they will be handed over and they will be found. And this is not something that we will give up on. We were not scared to do that when the regime was in utmost power and had its embassies and informants everywhere, and will definitely not stop now.
So Ibrahim, what can the international community do to help Syria now, a country that doesn't really have an effective legal judicial system? It's overwhelmed perhaps by all of these crimes committed. How does the international community help immediately?
I mean, the first thing to do is to be able to all prioritize the issue of accountability and make it on the top of the agendas. I know refugee return is important. I know there's a lot of economic development is important, but we also need to see that justice and accountability is on the paper, is on the narrative, is on the rhetoric, and so far so good on that. The second thing is to be able to engage with the Syrians who have been leading these efforts for many years, to kind of consult with them as to where and when they could come in. Should these be international courts? Should this be domestic courts? Syria is not the first conflict and not the first conflict that had a judiciary that is complicit in the crimes that the regime has committed. There are so many different conflicts across the world that we can learn lessons from. So there is a lot that needs to be done, but keeping it on the table now, I think, is an absolute priority. And before that priority of accountability, we have the priority that Kholoud talking about, which is the idea of the missing, and the idea of the mass graves, and the idea of some sort of closure for the loved ones. I think that is a humanitarian imperative before anything, so that we can move in terms of onto accountability and justice. But there's a lot that the international community can do, and it should have started a week ago. And we're seeing kind of states already kind of picking up the narrative and offering assistance where they can.
Roger, are people sent? Does Syria send people to the ICJ? Are they to be tried in Syria? How do you help Syria cope with the volume of people? Are there lessons we can learn from other war crimes tribunals in recent decades?
Well, I think, first of all, the basic humanitarian needs need to be met. And a big step in that regard will be to lift sanctions against HTS and against Jolani, so that the international community can give some humanitarian support. Food, water, electricity, all those things need to be in place before you can have a meaningful system of justice. The IIIM was created for the investigation and support for crimes that occurred in Syria over the last 12 years. And so there's a ready-made UN institution that has some case files that have been developed. But preeminent, as Ibrahim said, that needs to be the input of Syrian organizations, Syrians within the diaspora that have worked tirelessly to build collections of evidence and to support cases that have been moving forward in Europe and at the ICJ. So Syrians need to be front and center leading this process.
Roger, you talk about lifting lifting the terrorist designation on HTS, but already in the last 48 hours or so, Republican and Democratic US senators have said it's too early to do that. But I think you're saying that really it needs to be done now before it's too late.
Well, insofar as it's preventing humanitarian assistance from going into Syria, from engaging directly with the authorities there, I think we need to give a level of margin to the new Syrian government so that they can be successful. If there's a political reluctance to engage directly, then through intermediaries, assistance must be provided.
And Kholoud, do you see any value in pushing for the lifting of the terrorist designation of HTS and its leadership?
I don't know how useful this is going to be, but as a Syrian citizen, I don't know if this is going to be for the good or not. Maybe it's going to work on kind of achieving some peace and settlement currently at this level. But we're still anticipating. I can't decide, to be honest.
Okay, but those people who, I mean, you're looking at, there's potentially tens of thousands of people involved. We're working in the security apparatus for the Syrian government. Not everybody is going to get justice, perhaps. Do you want to see those people tried in Syria or tried elsewhere? What sort of international help do you think should be brought to Syria?
In the best scenario, we need to see them trialed in Syria, and the Syrian people will attend all the trials and see what they have done to the Syrian people. But this is the dream, and I know now that dreams can become true. And if not, then we will pursue them outside. So this is how persistent the families of the disappeared people and how persistent the Syrian people work, and even our supporters from the international organizations are regarding the Syrian atrocities and violations committed by the Syrian regime mainly, but also anybody else who was involved supporting in the killing and all the disasters that we have been through all over the past 13, 14 years.
All right. Ibrahim, the international criminal tribunals, the ones for Yugoslavia, lasted 24 years, 4,000 plus witnesses, 161 individuals sentenced. Rwanda, 21 years, 62 people sentenced. But the volume of crimes pales in significance to what you might be looking at in Syria. What lessons could you draw from those tribunals as you look at what Syria needs?
Well, I think the international community already did learn its lesson to not wait until after the conflict to start documenting or supporting documentation efforts. And that's already something that's been happening since 2011 with the UN Commission of Inquiry, and then in 2016 with the IIIM, the mechanism that Roger mentioned. That is its role is to assist in the prosecution of these these crimes. It's not a court itself, but it was created for this day when courts might be created. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, between Yugoslavia and Rwanda, we also had other courts being established domestically, hybrid with international support and so on. And a lot of the lessons were learned there in terms of efficiency, in terms of speed, in terms of access to victims, and so on. But yes, it might be a lengthy process, and I think it is not necessarily a bad thing to have a lengthy process where it allows people to see justice done. I don't think swift justice in this situation or long justice is a binary issue. We need to be able to grieve. We need to be able to remember. We need to see the amount of evidence come out. This is about every individual, every family, every victim. It's for people to sit and watch through this thing. It's about applying pressure for all these times. And when we recall the Yugoslavia and Rwanda and so on, we recall the War Crimes Tribunal, but within that, implicitly, we're recalling that these were crime scenes. These were not just conflicts that were over and that's it. The fact that tribunals were established and took that long of a time exactly as you said, the amount of witnesses, that is a reflection of the criminality of the regimes there at that time. So in a way, from a narrative perspective, from a remembrance perspective, from a due process perspective, it's not necessarily a bad thing for justice to take its course. But again, we're not starting from scratch. We're starting with a huge amount of evidence. We're starting with a huge amount of resilience and persistence from Syrian men and women who, throughout the years have been pushing, and I can only imagine what they would be doing now in terms of coming forward and giving their statements and so on. And we're dealing with more experienced international communities. So overall, I am optimistic as to what would come next, but I think we need to get our act together, first of all, as Syrian actors who've been working on this, and to be able to sit together and figure out different strategies of how to move ahead.
Roger, who do you prioritise when you're looking at how to bring cases? There'll be many people lower down the ranks will say they have no choice. Is that a defence as well for them? But who do you concentrate on first? You have to start somewhere.
Indeed, you do. But if you have a variety of mechanisms operating, then I don't think you have to make strict choices. I think the international tribunals are well suited to prosecuting the senior leaders and those most responsible, but they alone cannot obtain comprehensive justice, as you mentioned, from the ICTY and ICTR experiences. To supplement those courts, there were domestic tribunals created. In the Yugoslav situation, there was the Bosnian War Crimes Court that was created domestically, sort of a hybrid institution, prosecuted many more, hundreds of cases. And the Rwanda example, there were traditional justice measures pursued called the Gacaca proceedings. And those 100,000 individuals would process through that traditional justice mechanism. And so I think for Syria as well, we need to have a system whereby the highest level senior leaders are prosecuted, and then also mid-level leaders. I think the decision was made by HTS to grant an amnesty to the conscripts who were not involved in killing of any Syrians. And I think that's a reasonable decision to be made, but that leaves a huge number of individuals that could be subject to prosecution in the future. And the Syrian community needs to be engaged so that they can make those decisions.
Kholoud, just lastly with you, there is a huge reckoning to come for Syria as it prepares to look at the horrors of the past decades. How do you prepare for that? How do Syrians prepare for that reckoning that's to come?
Okay, so for the groups of the survivors, if I may speak from this level, are grouping together. They've been preparing themselves for a long time. All of them are working on documentation, taking care of each other, doing psychosocial support for the families, and also making sure that we are all persistent, the ones who can stand up and continue the struggle to get to get to the last point when everybody is going to be recognized and all the pain is going to be wiped away. We are prepared. We've been working on this for a long time. We didn't have the hope that Assad is going to be toppled down that quick or any time, to be honest. But now it's over. Right. It's gone. And we still have a long path to go.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to
all
brace
right.
up.
Well, thanks to all our guests and good luck to all our guests, to Ibrahim Olabi, to Roger Lou Phillips and to Kholoud Helmi. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X and Instagram. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.